everybody. I'm Timothy Raska.
And I'm Jeremiah Talamoni.
And today, I'm thinking we're going to talk about sex work. Because, who doesn't love a good time and getting paid for it, right?
I don't.
Liar. You're a little whore. But I'm going to have Jeremiah start us off here.
So there are a couple different reasons why sex work is controversial. And not just because not everyone can do it, and because your girlfriend's doing it now, but because a lot of people can't decide whether or not it's moral.
Yeah, and I think it's 100% amoral because your girlfriend's not that pretty. But realistically, for almost everyone else but your wife, Jeremiah, it's totally feasible, and if you want to make money doing that, I just don't see a reason why you shouldn't.
Sorry, I'm eating a chip.
How did I know you were going to eat during this? I was just like, I should tell him not to eat during this. No, he's got it.
My wife made garlic dip. Snuck into the room. Tapped me on the shoulder. Mid-conversation, I turn around and just loads it into my mouth. That's sex work, man.
Is that sex work?
That shit made me nut. That was delicious. That was really good, baby. Thank you.
Anyway.
All right, pretend none of that happened. We start.
No restart, just keep going.
All right.
You don't remember what we were talking about, do you?
I do. So, what I've noticed, coming from different backgrounds and moving around as much as I did, I noticed that a lot of people view sex work as amoral, and it's not because of some morality that their parents instilled in them, but rather a religious base. The Christianity, Islamic, they have these opinions that they have are not solely based on their personal morals so much as they are based on religion.
I mean, yeah, I get that, but a lot of people, there are a lot of things that are in the Bible and lots of other, sacred texts that people just don't follow because they don't want to. And I think the real thing about sex work that makes people so uncomfortable with it is, one, we're raised in, this very sexual society. Kids shows have romantic subplots when you're 5. And by the time you're, 13, every show, there's at least one sex joke.
Right.
All the time. When you're a teenager and adult, every movie has a sex scene. Our culture is very obsessed with sex. And that could be ill or not. I'm not going to get into that right now.
Right.
But the fact that our culture is obsessed with sex, but simultaneously condemns it as evil because you're not married, or you're doing it for business, or you like it, making you a whore, just doesn't make sense to me, and it never really has.
Right. And I see eye to eye with you on that, but prostitution being world's oldest profession, as a lot of people call it, it's an American institution. While it didn't start in America per se, it's definitely one of the frontline issues here. And it begs the question, why aren't we separating church and state when it comes to certain issues, and why do we with others? Because, again, these morals, the reasons that prostitution is illegal isn't because that it costs money or taxpayers have to pay for it, but rather for moral reasons that are, again, religious-based. And it's illegal everywhere in the country except for Nevada, surprisingly.
I thought it was only Las Vegas County.
It could be. I just know Nevada.
I think it's only Las Vegas County, but we could be wrong.
Right.
It's not like we did research leading up to this. We're two idiots.
Oh, God. I can't even spell it.
But that's the thing that, gets to me, though. You have all these people like condemning just people who want to have sex. Whether they want to do it for money or not, they're just like, I want to have sex. I'm going to do it safely.
Right.
And if you want to get paid for that, I think you should be able to. Like, I mean, you've probably seen this argument before. Like, getting paid for things is legal.
Right.
Having sex is legal, but getting paid to have sex is illegal. Right?
Yeah, and I guess the thing is, prostitution is a victimless crime, or at least that's how I see it. There's no victim when you have sex, when you have consensual sex. Who lost? And
I don't know about you. You must have a better sex life than me, but my girlfriend's the one who loses.
if you have kids like I did, he lost.
He lost. There you go.
Yeah, my son lost.
The person who you created, they're the true loser in this scenario.
Net lost, and I'm gonna be honest. But with sex, a lot of people view it as a victimless crime because a lot of the time, the only people that are in general danger in sex work are the sex workers themselves. If you go and you pay for this and you do it safely, you take all the proper precautions before going into this. It can be totally safe. It can be fun. Maybe not affordable, but it's something you can do and walk away just fine with.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people don't look at it that way. That's the way it should be looked at, is how it should have started. No one gets hurt during this. And the ban against...
Unless they like it.
Right. They can hurt. The ban against prostitution, it's said to denounce the exploitation of sexual gratification. Prostitution laws are intended to protect like public health and welfare, to protect minors who would otherwise become involved in the sex industry, and thwart other associated like forms of crime, and also curb the incentive to exploit women. But who's to say that if a woman wanted to do these things, if a woman wanted to become a sex worker, is that still exploitation? Is it still immoral if she's making money? Because we believe sex work is real work, but that's not a sentiment that's shared across the country.
Yeah, well, here's what I'm going to tell you. You're making two key mistakes with that argument. One, you're assuming women are people who can enjoy sex. If you follow the classical line of reasoning, women are just bodies that produce food and babies, and sex is for men.
Right.
It's fucking terrible that people actually thought that. But no, what really bothers me about the whole prostitution thing is the only things that make prostitution dangerous is the fact that it's illegal. Like, if you go back to Prohibition, what made alcohol consumption so fucking terrifying was the fact that you had people who had no idea what they were doing producing something that a lot of people consume. And with prostitution, I mean, you have sex trafficking. Sex trafficking is terrible.
Right.
But if you have to be licensed and you have to get checked every fucking week, or every fucking week, if you have to get checked on a regular basis, you eliminate a lot of the risk, one, to the sex worker, and two, to the Johns. Like, it doesn't make sense to me why, if regulated, it's unsafe.
Right.
Like, minors wouldn't be able to get into it because you'd have to be of X age to work as a sex worker. Like,
and so here's something that I've given a little bit of thought to, and something I've discussed among my peers in the military. There's a certain culture in active duty military, whereas some soldiers are married and some soldiers are actively dating someone, or other service members even. There are a lot of service members that came into the military right out of high school with no sexual experience, no experience with a girl or a guy. People come in virgins, and in the Army, we actively target and make fun of virgins. It's just the culture. It's something that's been going on forever. It's one of those things that will take generations to change.
Oh yeah.
But the thing is, a lot of these soldiers, a lot of these privates come in, and they actively look for ways to change that, and a lot of them turn to prostitution. And because a lot of our first duty stations are Korea, we get deployed overseas, and in Korea, it's not in the United States, so it's a lot easier to find a prostitute on the street. They turn to these things, and they come back to America and expect the same thing. They expect to come back, find a prostitute, but it's very different here. Whereas in Korea, prostitution laws are strict, but punishing prostitutes it's much more lax. You'll see a lot of law enforcement in Korea actually partaking in prostitution.
Mhm.
That's not the case here.
Are you sure?
In North Carolina, I should say. It's not the case in North Carolina.
I don't think I've ever met somebody who was a prostitute, so I can't really speak there. But I've never seen it up here in Alaska, so.
I guess at the time I was too young, because when I stayed in Alaska, I didn't really keep an eye out for it. But as we grow older and times change, I started seeing it more and more, as there are plenty of people that turn to sex work here in North Carolina, specifically low-income, poverty-ridden areas, communities. They're just riddled with prostitution, sex trafficking, human trafficking, even. And I'm not sure what it's like in Alaska, which brings me to my question. I don't know if you've noticed, or have you noticed, just how much prostitution has risen in the last 5 years?
I don't think it's risen. I mean, I've definitely seen, like, 2 cars parked in a parking lot while I'm, like, grabbing food in the middle of the night because I work nights. And then one of them drives off and the other one just sits there for a while. And you definitely see, like, a scantily dressed woman hop out in a parka and just hop into her car. Like, you can tell she's wearing fishnets and a parka.
Well, James, like, cold and needed a jacket.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
Right.
But I personally know this. Like, my girlfriend, she's the best. But you hear stories all the time up here of people just getting snatched.
Yeah.
Specifically women from grocery stores. And because of this, I almost never let my girlfriend go grocery shopping by herself.
It's terrifying.
It's the worst. I mean, even when we go grocery shopping together, I'll be like, oh, hey, honey, can you go grab this from, like, 4 lanes down? And I'll finish doing what I'm doing because I walk faster because I got long legs. And then I'll just sit there for a minute like, what's taking her so long?
Right.
And then I get paranoid because I'm always a paranoid person. But, yeah. It's just something I don't think we should have to deal with. And if you help squash some of that market, because criminals, no matter who you are, they're always going to look for a market that's profitable. And there always will be some market of profitability for things that are a little less moral. Like, yeah, the 6-year-old, totally worth it. Like, people who want that are going to pay for it because they can't get it legally. But if you eliminate a large portion of the market, sex trafficking will definitely go down.
Right. And this is a personal sentiment. Finding a sexual partner isn't so hard, shouldn't be so difficult that you have to take it or buy it. Because no matter how ugly you think you are, no matter how dumb, how unattractive, how smelly you are, there is someone out there. There is someone out there for you. There's someone out there that'll probably do it for you for free even.
Yeah, I really thought you were going to transfer, like, no matter how ugly you are, Tim's got a girlfriend, so you still got hope. I really thought you were going.
I'm married. I'm the second ugliest person I know, and that's just something you have
Son
to
of a bitch.
I'm sorry. And there's just a plethora of reasons why, in my opinion, sex work should be legalized, regulated, and not as heavily as some people think it should be. Look at the way we handle guns in America. Weapons are pretty indicative in our American culture. Everyone has them. Everyone has a gun. I have a gun. I'm sure you have a gun. It's normal.
You don't know me.
Oh, you're right. It's normal.
I might not have a gun. You don't know me. I mean, I do, but that's besides the point.
Right. It's normal to have a weapon. The last a friend and I were talking about weapons in America, and it was for every family there's two guns. For every American family, there should be two guns. And I thought that's ridiculous. There's no way. And we looked at the rates. There's so many weapons in America. It's almost as many weapons as people in households.
Mm-hmm.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And look at the way they're handed out. They give maybe a week of background checks, and here you go. Here's a deadly firearm.
Well, I mean, it's kind of with the way our society was built, but I feel like we're trying to talk about sex work, so let's not go into what our country's issue is with guns.
There was a point. So America,
okay.
America's weapon, our culture surrounding weapons, looking at how dangerous and how many crimes have been associated with gun violence, and then you associate, or you take a turn and you look at sex work, and you see how little crimes were involved, violent crimes involving prostitutes and people who paid for prostitutes. I don't remember the last time I heard of a prostitute violently shooting somebody after they had sex or after the deed was done. But I can tell you the amount of times someone has bought a firearm and that person who bought their firearm shot somebody with it.
Remember the ShamWow guy?
Right.
If I remember correctly, a prostitute bit his dick or balls and then he beat her. Like, that's the last time I can think of a violent crime involving a prostitute.
I think that's the exact opposite of what I said.
Oh, okay, never mind.
That would be the guy having sex with the prostitute, not the guy beating the prostitute.
Okay, but to be fair, she bit him.
Oh, right. I'm sure he had it coming. I've seen his commercials.
You following me, camera guy?
Very demanding.
Fucking hell. But
my point was the way we regulate gun control, and how loose it is. It doesn't fully cover the risk, and I don't believe you'll ever be able to match the risk having this amount of weapons we have in America. You wouldn't be able to match that with the regulations. There's no way. But if we looked at prostitution the same way we looked at guns, we just regulated it, the amount of jobs that would open up for women and men, and women and men.
Yeah. And I mean, sex work is all kind of legal here. I mean, prostitution's still illegal in almost every place.
Right.
But I mean, you got shit like OnlyFans, you have porn, you have stripping, which is like pseudo a sex work thing.
Right.
All of those are legal avenues for you to make money, right? But if you remember, back in like March when we got the first stimulus check, the people who didn't get stimulus checks were people, I think it was over the age of like 16 or 14. It was, or under.
Right.
Oh, people over them didn't get them unless they were 18. So there was like a 4-year gap where parents didn't get them for their kids.
Right.
It was families who live with illegal immigrants, or just immigrants, I believe. So if you married somebody who's still going through the naturalization process, you don't get one. And then this one is the one that really pissed me off, because we all know Trump doesn't like Mexicans.
Right. Who does?
Wait a minute. But sex workers didn't get them. If you were a stripper, if you made money with OnlyFans, if you did anything like that, you did not receive a stimulus check.
Right.
Which is just fucking mind-blowing to me. That they, like, specifically codified that in law. It's like, oh no, you pump fuzzies? Or... Which is just weird. Like, you think about stuff like that as like, oh, well, a lot of these laws were written in the past and we just haven't gotten around to repealing them yet. But that is something they did actively in the last year. They actively said, people who are sex workers do not get the stimulus check.
That's ridiculous.
Especially because they're making very close contact with people sometimes.
Yeah.
I think...
Go ahead.
I think our connection to those like Judeo-Christian values is really what's screwing us here.
Right.
I mean, we've never elected a president who is atheist or agnostic. Every president has been some form of Christian, or at least says they're some form of Christian.
Right.
It was a big deal that JFK was Catholic. And I mean, like, that just doesn't make sense to me. As somebody who's very, like, firmly atheist, because I think the belief that there's a man in the sky is absolutely stupid, that you base your life decisions off of that.
Right.
Just doesn't make sense to me. And then you have these same people saying, well, my book says that, you know, pumping fuzzies is wrong, and that you should only do it when you have signed a piece of paper with God. Just doesn't make sense to me. Like, sex is a very natural thing, and the fact that people don't think of it that way is weird.
I agree. Which brings me to my next point. We mentioned, like, is prostitution moral, and what are we using to gauge morality? A lot of people use religion, and you and I use some form of moral compass that we've made along the way.
Cobbled together with sticks and stones and spit and glue and
Sticks,
cum.
stones, glue, and OnlyFans. But it makes me think. It makes me think, what are positive consequences of the legalization of prostitution? We mentioned the opening of jobs for men and women. The amount of the tax flow, communities would be revitalized. A lot of low income communities, it would be a new faucet for people to make money for the communities. Especially if it was treated like a normal job, legalized all the way through. If you looked at a resume and you put sex work on it, and people would look at it like a legitimate job.
Yeah, I mean, you said that, and the only thing that popped into my head is like, okay, sorry, honey, I got to drop you off at daycare, and then I gotta, and then I got a blowjob at 6, and then I got a meeting with my pimp in 2 hours, and then I got to get tested, and yeah, is it okay if I pick him up like 30 minutes early? Right? I mean, with the whole morality thing, the way, like, I personally have structured it is I've done my best to think something through to its, like, most basic thing. Like, you take any topic, and then you break it down. Why abortion is wrong, why blah 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 is wrong, or why people think it's wrong, right?
Right.
And you break that down to its most base elements until you're at the simplest thing, which is, you know, is it good to help people? Is it murder because they haven't been born? Is it, you break it down to its basis, most base elements, and you try and think it through every step up. Like, every level of abstraction, you think it through. So, murder is wrong, but is it wrong when they haven't been born? Is it wrong if they're nearly born? Do they have a heartbeat? Is that the point that they have life? Things of that nature. And then you also have to set a level of abstraction there, like, you should make different choices on whether or not you should do something based on an individual level versus, like, a state level.
Right.
Like, I think the death penalty is 100% wrong. At no point should the government be able to say to anyone, you don't deserve your life anymore. Right?
Right.
But I think me as a person, if I was getting attacked and I was in fear of my life, I have every right to kill that person to stop the attack. Because the government has a higher standard. Because there's at no point that you're going to be, you know, under attack by a single person.
Right.
And then the whole government's gone, right? Yeah. I kind of let us off on a tangent there, sorry.
All right, because you stay, and that was par for the course, I would say, what you just mentioned. Because what I was getting from what you were saying is that the government itself would obviously, they would, I know people that would attempt to monopolize prostitution. When I say I know people, being in the military, there are some entrepreneurs in the Army, man. I'm gonna keep it hard with you. These guys come in and they're looking for ways to make money. And the thing is, when you join the army, you do become a government official. You become one. It's not like explicitly stated when you sign the contract, but you are now a government official, and there's a lot of shady things that happen in the United States military. Plenty of shady things that happen, especially in the upper ranks. Like you've seen generals, people who've been in the army for their entire lives, 20, 21, 22 years, and they get caught on sex trafficking or human trafficking. And these are people who have been in for an extended period of time, and they turn to prostitution. They turn to prostitution and sex work, and they do it in illegal ways. They do it in the most terrible ways. And they get caught. But imagine if these are great leaders, by the way. These were great leaders, or at least you would believe so before finding out about this. I'm talking specifically about General Coward. He was a general over my unit for, I want to say, 6 years, because 8 years is like the longest you could be a commanding general. And while he was, I guess, in power, he had made a lot of great changes for my unit and say the military whole. But it wasn't until he got caught up with illegal prostitution and sex work, and this wasn't any underage situation. They said it was sex trafficking, but really it was like a ring going around these higher ups that would send prostitutes all around them, and they called it sex trafficking. Was it wrong? Yes, I would say legally it was wrong, but imagine if it wasn't, that he would still be in power, all these people would still be here, and all they were doing was paying for sex. Imagine the amount of officials that wouldn't have had to step down from power or wouldn't have been removed if this was legal. And obviously this is barring people who had sex, or I shouldn't say have sex. You can't have sex with a minor. That's called rape. Rape minors. Barring them from this, just imagine the amount of leaders that would still be here, that would still be in power, and how different sex work would be now.
I mean, now here's the thing. Even if they're adults, a lot of them were, what's the word I'm looking for? Groomed. Because you do find a lot of that. Because it's so illegal, and a lot of people don't want to be doing this for the rest of their lives, they're a risk. So, a lot of them will end up being groomed from a young age to do things of this nature. And that's not okay.
Right.
But the fact that they have to do this to find people is ridiculous, because there are tons of people who just want to have sex, and if you can get paid for it, fuck yeah. If it's safe, yeah. But you get my point.
I do. And that's something I can agree with, that it's genuinely a serious problem in America, that there are men in the United States that, like mentioned before, if you can't get a sexual partner, you shouldn't have. It's not so hard that you have to take it or pay for it. It shouldn't be. But you also shouldn't have to groom minors into it. I would also consider that taking.
Yeah.
And it's terrible. It's a terrible thing, because I know people that have been groomed, and I know you know people that have been groomed. And I'm sure many people listening would know people that have been groomed, or may have also been groomed themselves, as it's one of those invisible issues. It's something that people don't normally talk about. I'm hearing about this from another person in years. I haven't heard someone talk about grooming in a long time.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. People don't like to talk about things that make them uncomfortable.
Right.
And I mean, it's 100% the case with that. Like, people don't like to talk about things that make them uncomfortable. People don't like to think about things that make them uncomfortable. So, and you're considered an asshole when you bring something like that up.
Asshole.
Because people don't... Thanks. Because people don't want to think about it. I mean, that's why leadership roles are so important, is because most people don't want to make tough decisions. Most people don't want to think about tough decisions. That's why religion is so prevalent. There's a book written thousands of years ago that tells you exactly how to feel about everything.
Right.
I mean, it's the perfect scapegoat for intellectual decay, right?
People.
You just give up. You don't want to make the decision on whether or not it's okay for a 20-year-old woman who's down on her luck to use her body to make money.
Right.
You don't want to think about that.
Right.
So, you open the book and it says, don't be fucking unless married.
Right.
That's a direct quote.
Right.
And therefore, you have your answer. Somebody made the decision for you thousands of years ago. Ta-da. Everything is solved. You no longer have to think about it. And it just drives me crazy that people do that.
And it should. I think it should drive everyone crazy that some mystical sky dad in the sky.
Mystical sky dad.
He is up there deciding whether or not you can have fun or whether or not you can do something. Without going too far on this tangent, as a kid, being raised in a predominantly Christian home, non-denominational,
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with a sense of the word I would use, honestly, is guilt. I grew up guilty, and I grew up afraid of doing things that other people my age would be doing. And I lost my virginity at a fairly young age, but instead of
7.
3, actually, instead of and that's something that it's not life changing, but it's something that is definitely memorable. When you lose your virginity, that's something you hang on to that. And in my case, it was different, and I'm sure in a lot of cases, a lot of Christian people or Christians, I should say, they grow up, they go through this losing their virginity, and they're afraid because in the Bible it strictly says premarital sex is one of the biggest sins you can commit.
Yep.
And obviously I wasn't married at 15, so what could I do?
Were you really only 15? I thought you were 16.
Oh yeah. Well, what could I do? What could I do at that point?
Yeah.
Aside be afraid for my soul, this fear they instilled in me. And
I mean,
go ahead.
You go.
Right.
No, you go.
I would say I wouldn't want anyone to have that fear. You shouldn't be afraid because, like you said, is a very natural thing. The same way sex work should be naturalized. Sex as a topic should be naturalized.
But not the way our culture does it, because our culture is like, it tries to get the best of both worlds and somehow gets the worst of both. It's like sex is amazing and you shouldn't be ashamed to do it, but also you like having sex. What a whore!
Right.
Like we have this like weird gratification of both sides of that,
right.
And I think the issue there with like Christianity itself in that way is you felt guilty, right? Because you did something, which I mean is totally a valid thing if you did something terrible, but I think the easiest way to think about it is sex, like human sex, because apparently I have to add that now, fucking Twitter. Sex between two consenting adults. Nice job, Jared. You were 15. So
it's okay.
Right. But sex between two consenting adults who know exactly what they're doing, right? There should be nothing wrong with that. You have both made a decision to do this. But the fact that the Bible and many other religions say you shouldn't do that and therefore you feel guilty is just ridiculous. It's like the glorification of everything that's anti-human.
Right.
Like, yeah, I'm not going to get into this or we'll spend the next hour talking about it. But yeah.
I guess we'll move on to the next topic before we stay here too long. But to close out on this topic, we mentioned church and state being separated because, again, that's where a lot of our morals come from as a country, Christianity, Bible. But as Christianity is the predominant religion across all of America, a lot of people don't share the sentiment that sex should be naturalized. Specifically because in Washington, a fairly liberal state. Very liberal. There was a bill that was being passed around about having sex education in kindergarten, and the first thing that popped into everyone's head, all these Bible thumping, mountain loving Quakers, my kids are gonna learn about sex. My kids are gonna watch porn. That's the first thing they thought. But sex education is not that. It was just the fear of the word sex. They heard sex, and they heard kid, and it was just immediate fear. And I think it would be very interesting to see what would happen to our country as a whole if that general fear was gone, that fear of sex, and not in the way you mentioned, where people gratifying sex. I don't think sex should be gratified, but also shouldn't be feared.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
For our next topic, though, this is something I want you. How have you personally, being from Alaska, where sex trafficking is fairly high, and me also staying in Alaska, I've noticed people around me as I grew up, high school and middle school, turn to sex work. I know a couple. I'm sure you know a couple. What would you say to them? What do you think? Or what would they listening to this conversation? Listening, how do you think they feel and how it's in the country?
Let me think. So basically what you're asking is what I would say to people who have turned to sex work, while either illegal or legal.
Right, and these people you know. These are personal friends, or maybe not friends, but people you know.
Mm-hmm. I mean, honestly, I would just say, like, as long as you're doing it for the right reasons, go ahead. I mean, it's your personal right. It's your own body.
Right.
But if you're doing it because you want higher self-esteem, like I know several people who have turned to sharing nudes, doing things of that nature, just because they didn't feel good about themselves and they wanted that gratification.
Right.
I don't think that's where it should be taken, but I know a lot of people do things for their own reasons, and just make sure to be safe and not do anything stupid. Or anyone stupid. Yeah.
And this is the final question before we end this podcast. And this is something that anyone listening in on can think about.
Or just comment, because I'm going to put this on my YouTube channel. If it doesn't sound like shit.
Does prostitution harm emancipation or simplify it?
Emancipation?
Right. Being free of laws, being free of like legal restraints. And I'm talking about like our bodies as a whole, because believe it or not, something we've all noticed is in America, there are laws concerning your body, what you can and cannot do with it. Do you think prostitution harms the idea of emancipating your body, being free to do with what you want with your body as you please? Do you think it simplifies it, makes it harder? Because legalizing sex work would obviously bring more regulations to your body. It would. What can you and can you not do if sex work were to be legalized? What's the extent of BDSM? It's not like you can have someone recording. I'm sure if you wanted to, but how would you even regulate these things? But that's something I think everyone should think about, because there's no straight answer when it comes to this.
Yeah. Well, I'm not gonna answer that personally, because I think I'm just gonna leave that as an open question to anybody we or I show this to on my YouTube channel, wherever the fuck we decide to put this, if it doesn't sound terrible. So I think that's gonna be the end of it. What do you think, Jer?
I think this has been a genuinely eye-opening and mind-opening conversation and podcast. And if it sounds cool, I would like to play it when I drive home or drive to work.
All right, cool. All right, so I think that's the end of it. So, bye.